The 8-year-old girl was last seen around 11:30 p.m. last night near the Watauga Falls State Park, at the mouth of the Claremont Forest. Authorities say that the girl and her family were camping when she mysteriously vanished during the night. According to the local sheriff's department, there are no signs of foul play at this time. However, the whereabouts of Sadie Willis to remain a mystery at this time. Authorities continue to tirelessly search for the girl and welcome any volunteers. We will continue to provide updates on this tragic event as the story unfolds. If you have any information regarding this disappearance or if you wish to volunteer, we urge you to call. My focus on the news broadcast was cut short as the ringing phone startled me out of a trance. After answering, I quickly realized who was on the other end. Jim, I think we're gonna need your help with something. Have you heard about the missing Willis girl? Sheriff Keeler blurted out all in one breath. I looked back up at the TV, staring at the photo of the young girl. Yeah, sure, I just saw it on the news right now. What does this have to do with me? I probed him. We've been searching all over for her, but we have come up short. We have reason to believe that she is in the Claremont Forest somewhere. Lost, not kidnapped or anything. At least that's what we think right now anyway. Our dogs tracked her into the forest but lost the scent a few miles in. What he said was the one thing that I didn't care to hear. Memories of the forest flooded my thoughts, and I squirmed in my seat. I remained silent long enough for him to continue. I really need your help. You're a damn good tracker, Jim, and the only person that really knows Claremont Forest. You might be our only hope at finding the girl. The sheriff stopped speaking, and I could hear his heavy breathing through the phone. I looked at the pictures of my own daughters on the mantle, and then back at the photos of the girl on the TV, and I made my decision. Okay, I'll help you out. But I promise you one thing, Sheriff. I will never do it again. Is that clear? Understood. I'll have a couple of my guys meet you at the park entrance in an hour. Thanks, Jim. Make sure your guys are armed, Sheriff. I said before the call ended. I sat there in my living room for a moment and I instantly regretted my decision. It was based purely on the fact that I felt bad for the girl and her family. Claremont Forest is a place that isn't meant to be explored, and for an abundance of good reasons. Many strange things have happened there, and the public is constantly advised to steer clear of it. However, against my better judgment and utter disbelief, I found myself loading the truck and heading over to Watauga Falls, within just a few minutes of hanging up the phone. When I arrived, I found two guys waiting for me. The deputies introduced themselves as Ramirez and Simpson. They were both young and looked a little anxious about what we were going to be doing. By that time, it was around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, which meant we only had a good 3 hours before the sunset. One of the deputies unrolled a map on the hood of my truck. He pointed to the exact location that the dogs lost the girl's scent. I studied the area and estimated that it was about 3 miles or so from where the family had been camping. That part didn't make any sense at all. I didn't foresee a little girl covering that much ground through a dense forest, especially during wintertime. The area that he pointed to was near the old military bunker, dead center in the middle of the forest. I gave both of the men a quick rundown of what they should expect. I told them sternly that they shouldn't do anything unless I approve of it. With a confirming nod from each of them, we set off into the woods. After a few minutes of walking, Simpson, the younger of the two deputies, asked me if he was allowed to speak. I agreed and he continued. So, what's the deal with this forest? I'm new around here and I keep hearing everybody talk about it. I stopped, spinning around to face him. I figured it was better if he knew exactly what we were getting into. Well, during the Cold War, the military built an installation up here. I guess the thick woods provided total isolation for them. And back then, there weren't too many people in this county at all. As I paused to take a drink of water, I saw both of the men hanging on to my every word. Anyway, so there's a bunker in here. A matter of fact, it's still here. They used to house a nuclear reactor. The reactor is just for testing radiation and so forth, but apparently it had a meltdown years back. The government scrapped the project and sealed the bunker off. It was a little bit too late though, because the entire area around the bunker became contaminated by radiation. The river that splits the forest was reportedly contaminated too. Not a single living thing can be found within a 10-mile radius of the bunker. That is except for some really strange shit. The men both stared at me with wide eyes. All at once, they bombarded me with questions. I had to assure Ramirez that the radiation levels were no longer harmful, among other trivial questions. Those questions didn't bother me. It was the one that Simpson asked next. "What kind of weird shit have you seen here, Mr. Jim?" By that time, we had all three started walking again, so I never turned around. I simply shot him an answer over my shoulder. "The kind of shit I don't want to talk about anymore. Now keep moving." The rest of the trek was in complete silence, as I assumed both the young men were trying to process everything in their heads. Eventually we came to the area where they had claimed that the dogs had lost the girl's trail. The outline of the bunker was visible through the trees just ahead of where we stood. Both of the sheriff's guys stared at it, quietly whispering amongst themselves. I searched around the ground until I settled on a pair of tracks that I figured were from the girl. I motioned the guys to follow me, and I set off closely following the footprints. The deeper we went into the forest, the more I felt like we were being watched by someone. Something. By that point, we were then fully inside the radiation zone, so I could see for several hundred yards in each direction. My paranoia started to build and I began scanning all around us. Nothing moved at all, yet I couldn't shake that feeling. The light burning, the subtle tingling feeling of being watched just wouldn't go away. I became a little nervous, so I grabbed the rifle that had been slung across my pack. I chambered around and I tightly clenched the stock of the rifle as we walked deeper into the woods. I heard a couple faint clicks behind me and I turned to see that both the officers had drawn their service weapons as well. We continued following the tracks for quite some time until they suddenly disappeared. I dropped down onto my knees and I brushed away the leaves. There was nothing on the dirt. It was as if the girl had vanished into thin air somehow. I moved my head slowly back and forth across the horizon, searching for a sign of something. But there was nothing. No drop-offs, no caverns. Nowhere the girl could have gone without leaving a trace. I scrambled across the ground and I found a new set of tracks a few feet away from where the girls had ended. The tracks appeared to be heading in the same general direction as the others. However, they were much different from the ones I had assumed had been from Sadie Willis. The new tracks had been made with bare feet, much larger than her footprints. There was no way that the tracks had come from this little girl. Nevertheless, we began to follow the mysterious new tracks, with the hope that they might lead us to the girl. The footprints zigzagged through the barren forest for the better part of a half-mile. The further that we trekked into the forest, the more leery I became of the overwhelming sensation of being watched. My eyes caught small glimpses of sudden movements, but there was never anything there once I had turned my head. Just the same as the girl's footprints had, the new tracks mysteriously ended without a logical explanation. I knelt down again and I searched the forest floor, but that time, I did not find a single track at all. They just stopped as sudden as they had started. The sound of rustling leaves caused me to whip my head over to the left. I squinted my eyes the same direction as the noise. I noticed that both the deputies were staring the same way also. I slowly slid my hand across the rifle stock and quietly thumbed the safety off. I lifted the gun and I studied the woods through the sight. Other than the sounds of my body settling into the leaves, the entire forest was eerily silent. The leaves crunched from the opposite direction and I turned to see what was there. Before I could even fully turn my head around, I heard shouting. "Don't move!" Deputy Ramirez's voice echoed throughout the entire forest. I quickly turned and followed the sound of the voice, and I found Deputy Ramirez pointing his pistol towards something in the forest. Simpson was closely behind him, gun also trained the same direction. My eyes left the two deputies and landed on a truly horrific sight. Just mere feet in front of the men stood a terrifying-looking creature. The beast stood on two legs with the general shape of a person but was crouched down in a very peculiar way. Its entire body was hairless with only gray desiccated skin tightly stretched across its bony frame. Crooked teeth protruded from its seemingly lipless mouth and thick strands of drool streamed down its chin. All of this happened so quickly. I failed to notice something even more terrifying than the sight of the strange beast. As it stood there, shifting back and forth, I caught a glimpse of something it held tightly in both hands. I focused further, finding that it was the body of the little girl. Ramirez stepped forward, issuing the same demand to the creature. As soon as he did, the creature let loose a high-pitched shriek that made the three of us cover our ears. It backed away, still holding Sadie's limp body. The movements that it made were shaky and broken, each time with a loud crunching noise. Deputy Ramirez looked up to me, while still training his gun on it. I waved my hand, motioning for him to remain calm. I took a cautious step forward and the creature turned to face me. There were no eyes on the face, but it definitely could see me somehow. Its mouth widely twitched and moved around the large teeth. A guttural grunt came from the mouth as I moved closer to it. And the closer I walked, the more it began to grunt, each time louder than the last. The sound of its voice was raspy and strained, like someone wheezing. "Matt Dolly." It grunted towards me. Another few steps and I lowered the rifle, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. The creature relaxed in its stance as well. "Matt Dolly." It continued to grunt after each step I took. I soon noticed that each time it spoke, it held Sadie's body up for me to see. I managed to position myself within a few feet from it. I flashed a thumbs up behind my back to the deputies. My eyes were locked onto the creature's face, and I smiled at it while kneeling down. It drew back further away from me but continued to closely watch all of my movements. I stayed there for a minute, trying to establish some sort of trust with it. The creature remained crouched down, quietly studying me. "Can you, understand my words?" I softly asked. To my surprise, it nodded. "What you got there in your hands?" I asked next. It looked down to focus on the little girl's body before looking back up towards me. Again, it lifted Sadie up and said, "Matt Dolly." I thought for a second, trying to come up with something to say back. "That's your Dolly?" I figured it was worth a shot. Amazingly, the creature's mouth opened and it looked like it was smiling. It constantly nodded its head. "Matt Dolly, Matt Dolly, Matt Dolly." It kept repeating the words over and over again. I turned to look at Ramirez and found both of the cops are still completely terrified. I turned back towards the creature and I softly chuckled. "That's a good dolly. Do you think maybe I could see it?" The creature turned around and stared into the woods. After a minute, it turned back to face me and held Sadie's body up with both hands. "I like it, I really do. That sure is a good dolly you got there. Do you mind if I hold it? I asked next. A loud crack came from it, craning its neck backwards again. Once again, it had turned to face the opposite way. I too looked the same direction, but I didn't see anything other than the trees. Please? I promised to give it back, I said while it was still faced the opposite direction. The head snapped back around to look at me and nodded once. I glanced over my shoulder and I locked eyes with Ramirez. I winked and I slowly nodded my head at him. He understood the signal, taking a couple of steps towards me. The creature extended its arm, shoving Sadie towards me. I took the girl in my hands, never breaking my gaze with the strange beast. I breathed a sigh of relief and I felt the warm skin and a beating heart. It looked like the little girl was only unconscious. The creature nervously crawled closer to me, reaching one hand forward. Mad Dolly. Yeah, I'm not gonna do anything with your dolly. I love this doll, I said after realizing that it was beginning to panic. I held the girl and I continued to smile at the creature. This is such a good dolly. Do you mind if I show it to my friends over there? I'm sure they would like to see it too, I asked while smiling really big and nodding my head. It looked past me and stared at the deputies for a moment. The creature nodded its head and I rose to my feet, slowly walking towards Ramirez. I stared into his eyes the entire time, trying to keep him calm with my expressions. Deputy Simpson took a step towards me, and I heard leaves rustling quickly behind me. The next few moments were a blur, happening almost in a state of slowed motion. A loud shot rang out first. I flinched at the sound of it, nearly dropping the girl. I quickly realized that Simpson had fired his weapon. I spun around to see a bloody mist suspended in the air, and the creature falling backwards onto the ground. I turned back to face Simpson, but found that he was faced the opposite direction. A flash of gray streaked in front of my eyes, followed by another high-pitched shriek. After a loud scream and more gunshots, everything settled. I looked up to find that Simpson was gone. I don't mean dead. I mean he had vanished from right in front of my eyes. There was no sign of him. Ramirez was turning circles in place, pointing his sidearm all around and calling out for the other deputy. I looked away from him and I found that the creature was no longer on the ground. My mind kicked into autopilot, and I grabbed the girl and I took off sprinting through the woods. Go! I screamed at Ramirez as I ran past him. I threw the girl's body on one shoulder and I held the rifle with my free hand. The leaves loudly rustled from all around. It sounded like a tornado was hitting the forest. I ran as fast as I could and I heard Ramirez not too far behind me. I sensed something else running to my left, keeping the pace with me. Mad Dolly. The words came to me as the same shrieking sound from before. I craned my neck and I found the same creature running parallel to me just a few yards away. A stream of blood cascaded down the front of its body, but it didn't seem to faze it at all. Mad Dolly. It continued to scream as we ran. A loud noise resonated from behind me. The creature was no longer on my left. The sounds that followed were not pleasant to hear. A desperate, blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees, followed by a quick succession of gunfire. Mad Dolly. The horrific sounds forced me to stop running. I set the girl down on the ground and I watched in horror as 4 more of the creatures ripped Deputy Ramirez's body to shreds. I lifted my rifle and I fired several shots in that direction. I wasn't aiming for the creatures. I was aiming to end the poor man's torment. His body went limp as one of the bullets connected. The little creatures continued to violently rip him apart, pulling off all of his limbs. The one creature that had taken Sadie crouched halfway between me and the horde of the others that were dismembering the deputy. Its head swung back and forth like it was deciding what to do next. It eventually focused on me and started charging again. Mad Dolly! It squealed while running on all fours towards me and the girl. I reloaded the rifle, cracking off a few more shots to allow me a head start. I scooped the girl up and I continued to flee the forest. After a few minutes, I looked over my shoulder, but I didn't see it in pursuit of me any longer. As I neared the edge of the park, I could hear the screams of the creature from deep within the woods. I found the sheriff and a handful of deputies waiting for me at the park entrance. They all stared into the woods with a look of terror carved into their faces. I'm told that the screams continued all night long, yet not a single soul dared to enter the woods. The time after I made it out was comparably worse than being inside the forest. The little girl spent a few days in the hospital but recovered just fine. The only silver lining to the whole thing. I visited her a few times to make sure that all was well. Apparently she didn't have a single memory of the events inside of Claremont Forest, which was the best thing for her own soul. I spent weeks being questioned about the two deceased officers. I told the story of what had actually happened multiple times to multiple people. However, I wanted to vomit when I heard a news broadcast blaming the death on a bear attack. It was a stereotypical government cover-up at its finest. As for me, I remained true to the promise I made the sheriff. I never returned to the forest. The thought of it and that night's events remained buried deep inside of my memories. The last I heard, a platoon of National Guard soldiers were sent in to try and recover the bodies of the two deputies, and I can only assume to see what the hell is actually going on in there. I'm sure that ended well.